Husband and my mother-in-law thought the house was theirs when they threatened me with divorce, but now they can move in together to pursue their unhealthy relationship because it has been my inheritance. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office worker who somehow ended up in a situation worthy of a TV comedy. I'm a hardworking woman. That's me. Married to a man who's still tied to his mother's apron strings. That's my husband Gary. And a mother-in-law who thinks she's the Queen of England. I know what you're thinking. Katie dear, why did you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you. Love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently stupid. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true. Tall, handsome, and capable of forming complete sentences. Something rare in the wild jungle of higher education. A few years later, here I am living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter, a house I inherited from my father. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, hold on, because this is where it gets interesting. You see, my dear husband and his loving mother seem to be under the impression that this beautiful, spacious house, worth every penny of those $2 million, was thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. But before I reveal the juicy details of how I pulled off the scam of the century, let me take you on a journey through the hilarious, frustrating, and frankly absurd events that led me to the moment when I finally decided to drop the most epic truth bomb. College days and early red flags. Was an enthusiastic college student with many expectations when I met Gary. Armed with nothing more than a dream, a pile of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee, Gary entered my life like a knight in shining armor. If that armor was made of football jerseys and beer cans. Our eyes met in a crowded classroom, and it was love at first sight. Well, okay, it wasn't that romantic. He actually spilled his energy drink on my notes, and I might have said a few words that would make a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like ruined notes and sticky fingers, right? From that moment, we were inseparable. The first hint of Gary's particular relationship with his mother came on our third date. Picture the scene, candlelit dinner, soft music, and the two of us gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Suddenly, Gary's phone rings. Does he ignore it? Like any person would on a date? Not our Gary. He practically lunges across the table to answer it. Hello, Mom, he says, with all the enthusiasm of a Labrador, seeing its owner after 5 minutes of separation. What followed was a 15-minute conversation about whether he had remembered to pack his lucky underwear for exam week. I wish I were joking. I really wish I were. But did I run for the hills like any self-respecting woman would? No. I stayed there, drinking my cheap lukewarm wine, thinking, how sweet he loves his mom. Pass Katie, if I could go back in time and slap you to bring you to your senses, I would. And hard. The engagement and wedding planning. Nightmare years pass. And suddenly we're engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a hidden ring. A botched proposal speech that mentioned his mother no fewer than 5 times. And me in my infinite wisdom, saying yes. The wedding planning phase was an experience. And by experience, I mean a nightmare peppered with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. So friends, this is where Carol really began to shine. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the flavor of the cake, had to be approved by Carol. God forbid we chose lilac for the bridesmaids' dresses. Carol nearly had an aneurysm over that. And Gary, well, he was about as helpful as a chocolate teapot. Every time I tried to ask his opinion about something, he'd shrug and say, whatever you and Mom think is best, honey. I should have known then that I wasn't just marrying Gary. I was entering into a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. House hunting and moving in. But the real fun started when we began house hunting. Most couples look for houses together. Maybe bring a real estate agent or a trusted friend for a second opinion. Not us. That would be too normal. We brought Carol. But the coup de grace was when we finally found a house that everyone approved of. And by everyone, I mean Carol gave her approval, and I was too exhausted to keep arguing. While we were in the living room, Carol turned to Gary with tears in her eyes and said, oh honey, I can see our family gathered here on Christmas morning. Our family. Not your family. Our family. I was right there, and somehow I had already been erased from the picture. Did Gary correct her? Of course not. He just nodded, probably imagining himself in footy pajamas, opening presents while his beloved mommy watched with shining eyes. By this point, you're surely wondering why I didn't run away. Believe me, I've asked myself that question approximately 37,042 times since then. But love, lack of sleep from so many house visits, and the sunk cost fallacy are a dangerous combination. So against all better judgment, and probably several laws of nature, we got married. The wedding circus. The wedding was, well, let's just say, if you looked up the word circus in the dictionary, you'd find a photo of our wedding party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that right. White to her son's wedding. When I pointed this out to Gary, he just shrugged and said, Mom says it's more of an off-white. Seriously? Off-white? My ass. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm. But we made it through. We said our I-do's, cut the cake, and embarked on our new life together. And by together, I mean with Carol's constant presence, lurking in the background. Married life with a third wheel. Now you'd think that once married and settled in our new house, the one Carol chose, remember, things would calm down. No, married life with Gary was like being in a 3-legged race, except the third leg was Carol's, and she was always trying to make me trip. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free in Gary's head and dictating every aspect of our lives. Want to buy a new sofa? Better check with Carol first. Thinking of trying a new dinner recipe? Oh no, Gary only likes meals the way his mother prepares them. Want to paint the guest room? Calm down there, young lady. Maybe Carol won't like that color combination. Pregnancy and baby drama. And before I knew it, I was pregnant. Now most women enjoy their pregnancies They have baby showers, decorate the nursery, and enjoy the glow of impending motherhood. I enjoyed Carol's constant commentary on everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you're expecting precious Gary Jr., you can no longer make decisions for yourself. Oh, Katie, you really shouldn't be drinking coffee. I never touched that garbage when I was pregnant with Gary. Well, maybe that explains how Gary turned out. Katie dear, are you sure you want to paint the baby's room that color? Studies show it could affect the baby's cognitive development. Again, Gary seems like he ate some of that paint too. And Gary nodded along with everything his mother said. I swear, if Carol had told him that standing on his head and singing, "I'm a little teapot," would ensure a healthy baby, he would have been upside down singing nursery rhymes before you could say umbilical cord. The birth and beyond. The day I went into labor was quite an experience. I was huffing and puffing, trying not to curse all the men on the planet. And guess who walked into the delivery room? Carol. Gary had called her before the hospital. I'm not kidding. His first instinct when his wife went into labor was to call his mommy. I'd say I was surprised, but by then I was too busy trying to give birth to Care. There I was, bringing new life into the world, with my husband on one side, looking like he was about to faint at any moment, and my mother-in-law on the other, offering pearls of wisdom, like now Katie. When I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make half as much noise. Having a baby just gave Carol more ammunition. Now I wasn't just a bad wife, I was also a bad mother. Every decision I made was wrong. I wasn't feeding the baby properly. I wasn't changing her correctly. I wasn't singing the right songs. It was an endless avalanche of criticism, all delivered with that saccharine smile that made me fantasize about pushing her into a barrel of dried cement. Gary was delighted. He had his mommy and his daughter under the same roof. The fact that his wife was losing her sanity seemed to escape him completely. The breaking point and career change. It was around this time that I realized I needed to make a change. Not for my sake. I was already too far gone. But for my daughters. I refused to raise a girl who thought it was normal for her father to consult his mother for every decision. I refused to let her grow up believing that her worth depended on how well she met her mother-in-law's impossible standards. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I changed jobs. Yes, you read that right. I quit my well-paying, stable job with irregular hours for a position that paid less, but gave me more time at home, because I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way Gary never would be. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that decision. Oh, Katie, are you sure that's a good idea? How are you going to maintain Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if Gary's lifestyle of playing video games and consulting his mum about which sock to put on required a six-figure income to sustain. But I stood firm. For the first time since I met Gary, I made a decision without considering what he or Carol might think. The last time I left you with the birth of my daughter and my brilliant decision to change jobs. Now let's fast forward a bit to when things really started heating up. There we were, a happy family of 3, or 4 if you count Carol, which Gary apparently always did. Our daughter was growing faster than Gary's pile of dirty laundry, and we were starting to feel a bit cramped in our current place. You know, the house Carol had so generously chosen for us newlyweds. One fine day, over breakfast of burnt toast, my dear husband told me something that almost made me choke on my carbon-flavored crust. Honey, he said, with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. I've been thinking. Mom's getting older and I'm worried about her future. What if we looked for a place where we could all live together? Now I pride myself on being a reasonable person. I had endured Carol's constant interference, Gary's inability to make decisions without consulting the mothership. But this was too much. I tried to reason with him. I pointed out that Carol had more years on her like a fine wine, full of preservatives, and would probably outlive us all. I reminded him that we valued our privacy. But no, Gary was determined. He had a whole speech prepared about family values and caring for our elders. I'm pretty sure Carol had written it for him and made him practice in front of a mirror. I faced a choice, accept living with the woman who had made it her life's mission to criticize every aspect of my existence, or be the evil daughter-in-law who denied sweet Carol the joy of watching her granddaughter grow up. But your friend Katie isn't one to give up without a fight. I put on my big girl pants and proposed a compromise. We'd look for a house, sure, but it would be near Carol's current house, not in it, close enough for frequent visits, but far enough away that I could pretend the doorbell was broken when I needed a sanity break. Surprisingly, Gary agreed. I suspect he was just relieved that I hadn't filed for divorce immediately, or had him committed to a psychiatric facility for even suggesting we live with his mother. The inheritance secret now. Remember how I mentioned earlier that I inherited a house from my father? Well, this is where things get interesting. You see, I hadn't told Gary about this little inheritance. Why, you ask? Well, partly because I knew that the moment Carol found out, she'd be redecorating the place in her mind. But mostly because, well, I guess I wanted something that was just mine. So I suggested we look for houses in the area where the property I had inherited happened to be located. Gary suspected nothing. He was too busy making sure every property we looked at had a suitable room for his mother's extended stays. Finally, we decided on a house. And when I say we decided, I mean I managed to convince Gary and Carol that the house I had inherited was on the market and was perfect for us. Because of course, having a bigger house didn't deter Carol. It just gave her more space to spread her special brand of crazy. She started visiting all the time. At first, it was just once a week, then twice, then every other day. Soon, I was looking for excuses to work late, just to avoid coming home and finding her reorganizing my cabinets, or giving me lessons on the proper way to fold fitted sheets. Gary was delighted. He had his mum always nearby, cooking his favorite meals, and generally treating him like he was still a 12-year-old who needed his mommy to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. The redecorating incident, about 3 months after we moved in. I came home one day to find Carol, who had let herself in in the middle of repainting our living room. "Oh, Katie, you're here," she said cheerfully, as if breaking into someone's house and redecorating it was totally normal. "I hope you don't mind, but that almond color was so boring. I thought a nice mauve would give it more life." Mommy, look what Grandma gave me." And there in my daughter's arms was the ugliest, tackiest dress I had ever seen. My daughter loved it, looking at my mauve walls, my radiant daughter, and Carol's satisfied face. I realized something had to change, and since it's legally frowned upon to throw your mother-in-law out a window, I knew the one who had to change was me. Parents' health crisis. It all started with a phone call from my mom. Now let me take a moment to appreciate my mother. Compared to Carol, she's a saint. She calls me once a week, remembers my birthday without Facebook reminding her, and has never implied that her way of loading the dishwasher is superior to mine. But this call was different. Her and my dad's health had been declining for a while, and things had taken a turn for the worse. They were really struggling to take care of themselves. They needed help. I did what any good daughter would do. I adjusted my work schedule, kissed my daughter, and prepared to split my time between my house and my parents' house. Gary's response was what you might expect. He muttered something about how hard it would be for him to manage without me, as if he were the one balancing a job, a daughter, and 2 sick parents. He even had the audacity to suggest that maybe Carol could come stay with us full-time to help. But I didn't have time for a tantrum. I had parents to care for, a daughter to raise, and a job to maintain. So I did what women have done since the beginning of time. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and carried on. Carol's reaction, what I didn't expect, was Carol's reaction to my new schedule. You'd think she'd be delighted. After all, I was out of the house more often, giving her free rein to redecorate at will and pamper her precious boy. But no, for her, the fact that I was prioritizing my own parents meant that somehow I was neglecting my duties as a wife and mother. I wasn't spending enough time with my daughter. The house was messy. Gary was eating too much takeout. It all exploded one night when I came home late from my parents' house, exhausted and emotionally drained, and found Carol in my kitchen with her lips pursed in disapproval. "Katie," she said in that sweet voice that made me want to commit serious crimes, "I think we need to talk about your priorities." And there, dear Redditors, I'll leave you for now, because what happened next? Well, that's a story for another time. The confrontation. I was in my kitchen, so tired I could barely see clearly. I had spent the day juggling work calls, changing my dad's IV, and trying to convince my mom she needed to eat something more than stale crackers and sadness. And now, here was Carol, staring at me accusingly. What came out of my mouth was a surge of frustration, rage, and enough curse words to invent new profanities. It was like a dam had burst, and years of repressed resentment came flooding out. Carol didn't take it well. Her face went through more colors than a chameleon in a bag of candy. Then Gary walked in. He was ready to defend my honor and put his mother in her place, right? Of course not. Gary took one look at the scene. His wife red with fury, and possibly foaming at the mouth, and his precious mommy looking like she was about to faint on the nearest sofa. And guess what he did? He took her side. In the great showdown between his wife and his mother, Gary chose his mommy. He started giving me a speech about respect, family values, and how I was tearing this family apart with my selfish behavior. But Gary wasn't done. He saved the best for last. In a move I'm sure he thought was his winning card, he threw out this gem. "If you ever wanted to get divorced, you and our daughter couldn't manage on your own. Do you understand?" Oh my sweet Gary, you just screwed up monumentally. I burst out laughing. Gary and Carol looked at me like I had finally lost my mind, and maybe I had. But in losing it, I also found something. My backbone. Once I could breathe again, I straightened up. "Honey, who said I'd be the one who couldn't manage?" The confusion on their faces was priceless. You could practically see the hamster wheels turning in their heads, trying to process what I had just said. The truth bomb, and that's when I dropped the biggest truth bomb. I told them everything. About the house. About how it wasn't just any house, but a $2 million property I had inherited from my father. About how every mortgage payment, every tax bill, and every leaky faucet repair had been paid with my money. Gary's face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Carol, on the other hand, went through shock, indignation, and then settled into a kind of calculating interest that gave me chills. But I wasn't done. I was on a roll, and nothing short of divine intervention was going to shut me up. I explained everything. How I had been biting my tongue for years, enduring Carol's interference and Gary's lack of character. How I had changed jobs, sacrificed my career, and bent over backward to accommodate all their whims. And for what? To be treated like a glorified maid in my own house. I made it very clear that things were going to change. No more surprise visits from Carol. No more redecorating without my permission. No more treating me like a charity case, who should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection they decided to give me. And to Gary, I made it clear he had a decision to make. He could start acting like a husband and father, or he could pack his bags and go live with his beloved mommy, because I was done. The aftermath and legal action, Carol predictably burst into crocodile tears, screaming that she had only wanted what was best for the family, that she couldn't believe I had deceived them. How could I be so cruel to poor sweet Gary? Gary, for his part, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. He stammered, stuttered, and even tried to argue that surely, as my husband, he had some right to the house. I did what any sensible woman would do in my situation. I called a lawyer, the kind of lawyer who makes other lawyers wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweats. Because if Gary thought he was going to intimidate me with divorce threats, he had another thing coming. My lawyer assured me that not only was the house completely mine, but if Gary wanted to insist on divorce, he'd be lucky to leave with anything more than the clothes on his back. Of course, this is real life, not a movie. So things didn't magically resolve overnight. Gary, in a surprising display of survival instinct, seemed to realize he had screwed up royally. He started talking about couples therapy, about fixing things, about how he loved me and our daughter. As for Carol, well, let's just say she didn't take her new status as persona non grata very well. She tried everything. Emotional blackmail, love bombing, even a half-hearted attempt at an apology. But I held firm. My house, my rules. And my rules said, no more Carol. I realized that by standing up for myself, by refusing to be a doormat anymore, I was teaching my daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that she deserves respect, that she doesn't have to tolerate abuse from anyone, not even family, especially not family. The final resolution. I'm back because I know how much you've been waiting for the conclusion of this story. And my wonderful marriage. Notice the sarcasm. I bet you wanted to know if Gary stayed with me, or with his beloved mommy. Well, let me tell you, he never really had a choice. Though to be honest, if he had, he probably would have chosen his mother. Luckily, shortly after my last update, the divorce papers were ready to serve him. Gary's face when he received the papers was as entertaining as you might imagine. A mixture of surprise, concern, and confusion. As if he couldn't believe what was happening. He acted like the divorce was the strangest thing in the world, as if he hadn't seen it coming. But honestly, what's really strange is that I hadn't asked for a divorce much sooner. What's even stranger is that I even married him in the first place. Or that I didn't run the first time he gave clear signs of being a mama's boy. Along with the divorce papers came, as expected, an eviction notice. I wasn't going to allow him to continue living in my house one day longer than necessary. The good news for him was that he didn't have to move far. His new and old address was right where everyone expected, his mom's house. Of course, I made that comment thinking it would be good news for him. I mean, what could be better than living with his beloved mother? Curiously, he didn't find it amusing. Why not? I have no idea. I thought he'd enjoy it with all their emotional incest. Why? Well, it's only emotional, right? Fortunately, he didn't take long to leave. It only took him a few days to pack and move. Probably because he already had some clothes at his mother's house. I don't want to know the reason. And I'm not interested. The divorce process. Once he left, everything proceeded as it should. The divorce process took a few months, as these things usually do, but it was finally completed. I kept the house because it was never marital property. It was an inheritance from my father. And for those asking, yes, it's possible to inherit something even if the person is still alive. As for the rest of our belongings, we divided them fairly. But best of all, Gary now has to pay child support. This was a huge relief because I was starting to consider looking for a better paying job to support my daughter and me now that he's not in the equation. However, thanks to the support, we can cover the difference without worrying too much. Also, now that his mother can no longer enter this house or interfere in our lives, there's significant savings. It's incredible what you can achieve when you expel an emotional parasite. Carol's attempts to return. As expected, Carol tried to come back. She wanted to come see her granddaughter. But I was very clear. If she wants to see her, she can do so during the time she spends with her dad. I made it clear that there's no place for her in this house. And yes, maybe I was a bit harsh. But I told her that dangerous animals aren't allowed here. The expression she made when I told her that was almost as good as Gary's when he received the divorce papers, custody and new life. As for custody of our daughter, we reached an agreement. She spends the week with me and weekends with her father, though realistically, she spends that time mostly with her grandmother, since Gary still lives with Carol and hasn't made any attempt to move out, despite several months having passed since he left my house. For the rest, I must say things are much better now. Once you get rid of what's poisoning your life, everything starts to improve. It's like I had been carrying a backpack full of stones for years, and when I let it go, suddenly everything became easier. I no longer have to walk on eggshells in my own house, or live under the constant shadow of Carol's criticism. My daughter is calmer, and while it can be difficult for her to have divorced parents, I think she also feels the difference without her grandmother's constant interference in our space. Now the house finally feels like my home. And if you're wondering, yes, I finally got rid of all traces of mauve in the house. That paint was the first thing to disappear. Once Gary left, freedom has a color, and I can assure you it's not mauve.